Somewhere along the way, productivity became our religion. We worship at the altar of getting things done, forever chasing the high of checking off one more task. But here's the truth nobody wants to hear. This race is rigged. You can't win. And honestly, trying to win might destroy you. The physical toll, the mental breakdown, it all piles up when you treat yourself like a machine that just needs better optimization. Don't get me wrong, productivity isn't evil. There's something deeply satisfying about meaningful work, about building something that matters. Our obsession with efficiency has given us incredible things, but somewhere we crossed a line. We stopped working to live and started living to work. Our entire sense of worth got tangled up in our output. Then came the data that made my stomach drop. A study of 1 million people in late 2022 revealed that productivity had become most people's top priority in life. Think about that for a second. In Britain, 65% of people ranked it above everything else. In America, 63%. In Australia, 58%. Above health, above money, above happiness itself. This obsession is eating us alive. And here's the cruel irony. It's actually making us worse at the very thing we're chasing. We're crushing our souls in pursuit of productivity, only to crush our ability to actually produce anything meaningful. So how did we end up here? And more importantly, how do we find our way back? The Protestant work ethic planted the first seeds. The idea was simple and severe. Hard work earns God's favor. Laziness condemns your soul. When Protestant settlers arrived in America, they didn't just build businesses. They built monuments to this belief. Work became sacred. Rest became suspect. That philosophy still echoes through our culture today. Though most of us aren't thinking about heaven when we pound energy drinks at midnight to meet a deadline. We're thinking about money, success, survival. You could blame capitalism for this mess. And sure, you wouldn't be wrong. But that's like blaming gravity when a plane crashes. Technically accurate, but not particularly useful. The real story is more complicated and more recent. During the Industrial Revolution, we got really good at making systems more efficient. Better farming methods, assembly lines, factories that could produce more with less. Productivity meant refining the machine. Then came the 1960s and the rise of office work. Suddenly, jobs moved from factory floors to desk chairs. We still wanted to boost productivity, maybe even more desperately than before, but we stopped trying to fix the systems. Instead, we started trying to fix the workers. Nobody asked how to make an office run better. They asked how to make office workers work harder. The burden shifted from the organization to the individual. Productivity became personal. Productivity became your problem to solve. Think about how absurd this is. The Industrial Revolution didn't perfect factory systems overnight. Henry Ford spent enormous amounts of time and money developing new tools, new methods, new infrastructure. But today, we expect ourselves to wake up and reinvent the assembly line every single morning. And we expect to do it while still executing all of our regular work at the same time. We're trapped in this outdated mindset that more is always better. There's no ceiling on what we should be able to produce. And when you buy into this logic, you're forced to choose between your professional ambitions and your personal life. Want to hit that deadline? Skip the bike ride with your partner. Need to finish this project. Eat lunch at your desk. Again, our personal and professional lives are locked in a cold war. Eventually, one side will collapse. And honestly, It's becoming painfully clear which side is losing. Here's what makes this so hard to confront. Productivity really is valuable. When everyone contributes a little toward a common goal, all of our lives can improve. In theory, anyway. So it's easy to justify the endless sprint. Plus, we celebrate our most productive people as heroes. We put them on magazine covers and stages. Meanwhile, if you're not productive, you're lazy. And in today's world, laziness isn't just a flaw, it's a moral failure. Our historical baggage around work mixed with modern cultural pressures has created something toxic. And make no mistake, it is toxic. This obsession with productivity is literally killing us. It's disturbingly easy to tie your self-worth to your to-do list. You write down 10 things. You finish 7th. Suddenly, you're a failure. Or maybe this feels familiar. You pack your workday to the brim, then come home too exhausted to do anything but scroll through your phone for 3 hours. Then you feel guilty for being lazy, even though you're only this drained, because you were too productive all day. It's mini burnout every single day. If you measure your worth by what you accomplish, you'll never be enough. There will always be more you could have done. The mountain has no top, and as you pour everything into productivity, other things start to crumble. Real food becomes meal replacement shakes. Breakfast becomes a grey smoothie engineered for efficiency, stripped of any joy. You see the people you love less often. They start to feel like strangers. You chug energy drinks so you can survive on 5 hours of sleep, even though sleep deprivation destroys your cognitive function and actually makes you less productive. The hobbies that used to light you up, gone. And with them, the simple joy of being alive. What's left is a toxic cocktail of depression, anxiety, and loneliness. Your body suffers too. Higher risk of heart attacks, strokes, and countless other ailments. But hey, your to-do list looks great. Until tomorrow, when the cycle starts again. There's a massive industry built around productivity optimization. Books, gurus, YouTube channels, TikTok creators. Everyone has a hack, a system, a secret. Here's the thing, none of it works. In fact, trying to optimize your productivity is one of the best ways to guarantee you'll be less productive. Take any random productivity hack, bulletproof coffee, time blocking, mushroom supplements, whatever. Each one is just another task on your already overwhelming list. And when you inevitably forget to do them because you already have too much to do, you feel like a failure all over again. One more thing you couldn't quite get to, cramming more and more into each day in some endless arms race with yourself doesn't make you productive. It leads straight to burnout. Burnout isn't just feeling tired. It's chronic, unmanaged stress manifesting in your body. Your stress hormones spike. It's measurable, physical, real. Severe burnout can trigger depression, insomnia, loss of appetite, even thoughts of suicide. Tiredness is your body's alarm system. It's trying to warn you, take a break before things get bad. But in our caffeinated, hustle-obsessed culture, we ignore the warning. We don't rest. We drink more coffee. We get promoted for working so hard. But rest is what actually matters. The research proves it. Rest helps your brain focus. It helps you get more done. Quality sleep has a profound impact on cognition and memory. In the 1990s, psychiatrist Nancy Andreasen coined the term rest, random episodic silent thought. It describes the intensely creative brain activity that happens when you do nothing. According to her research, inactivity is when your brain is most productive on a neurological level. She studied creative people across every field and found that breakthroughs usually come right after long periods of mental rest. But here's where things get tricky. If we only value rest because it makes us more productive, isn't that just another trap? Is relaxation really meaningful if it only matters as a tool for productivity? So what if we questioned the entire concept of productivity from the ground up? It would be easy for me to sit here and say, just stop working so hard. Quit your job. Take a year off. But most people can't do that. A single parent raising 3 kids on a tight budget can't take daily walks in the forest. It's just not realistic. But here's what I believe. Rest is still her right. Our culture has stolen that right, but it's still hers. So maybe the answer isn't to accept that some people don't deserve rest. Maybe the answer is to redefine what productivity means and what activities count as productive. There's an old Taoist story by Zhuangzhou called The Useless Tree that might help here. A carpenter walks through a forest and comes across the most massive tree on the mountain. It's ancient, enormous, magnificent, but its bark is gnarled and twisted, full of knots. Those knots mean the wood is worthless for building. So the carpenter declares the tree useless. That night, the tree appears to the carpenter in a dream. It tells him, fruit trees get torn apart the moment their fruit ripens. Hardwood trees get cut down the moment they mature. I have spent my whole life striving to be useless. That uselessness is why I've lived longer and grown larger than any other tree in this forest. The tree has a point. Think about the squirrels that eat its acorns, the insects living in its branches, the creatures finding shade beneath its canopy. But still, we call it useless. Just like the carpenter, our definition of productivity is painfully narrow. The activities we label as least productive, relaxing, simple hobbies that require little effort, are often the ones that make us happiest. And in a professional context, if someone wants their company to be as productive as possible, maybe they should squeeze the systems harder, not the people. Instead of demanding that employees individually produce more and sacrifice their personal lives, maybe we should demand that our work systems produce more. When your boss says the company needs to boost productivity, maybe that's his problem to solve, not yours. Henry Ford wasn't a hero of the working class, far from it. But he didn't just tell workers to build more cars. He created the assembly line. He fixed the system. But we can't even have these conversations anymore. We've accepted that it's up to each individual to output more work. Any attempt to manage your workload gets labeled as laziness. So next time you skip lunch to finish a report, ask yourself, what am I producing? For whom? And why? Because here's what I believe, creating happiness counts as being productive too. Imagine someone knocking at your door right now. You look through the peephole and see a stranger, cold eyes, hands hidden. He knows you're there. He asks one simple question. Is your best friend inside? Here's the thing. Your friend is inside, hiding, terrified. And you know, with absolute certainty, that if you tell the truth, your friend dies. So you'd lie, right? Of course you would. We all would. It's not even a question. But there was this philosopher, Immanuel Kant, and he said something that sounds absolutely insane. Never lie. Not even now. Not even to save your friend's life. Tell the murderer the truth and let whatever happens, happen. And before you write him off as a madman, here's what's haunting. He might have a point. This video is part of my series, Philosophical Moral Dilemmas. And today, we're exploring something that keeps me up at night. The moment when telling the truth becomes an act of violence, when lying becomes heroism, and when doing the right thing might destroy everything you believe about yourself. This is the absolute lie. When does truth become a threat? Let me tell you about Kant. Not the stuffy textbook version, but the man who believed he could solve morality like a math equation. Kant lived in a world drowning in moral relativism. Everyone had their own version of right and wrong. Different cultures, different rules, different circumstances, different answers. It was chaos, and Kant looked at that chaos and said, no. There has to be something absolute, something that's true everywhere, for everyone, no matter what. He called it the categorical imperative. Don't let the fancy names scare you. It's actually a simple test. Before you do anything, ask yourself, what if everyone did this? What if this became the rule everyone followed, always, everywhere? Think about lying for a second. Really think about it. What if everyone lied whenever it was convenient? What if your doctor lied about your test results? What if your partner lied about their feelings? What if every contract, every promise, every I love you could be true or false with equal probability? Society wouldn't just be messy, it would be impossible. Language itself would stop working. Words would become meaningless noise. You couldn't trust anything anyone said, ever. Civilization would collapse not with a bang, but with a whisper, because you'd never know if that whisper was true. That's why Kant said lying is absolutely, universally, always wrong. Not because lies hurt people, though they do, but because lying destroys the very possibility of truth. It's like poison in a well. Once it's in there, everything that comes out is contaminated. So back to that door. Back to your friend hiding upstairs, heart pounding, while the murderer asks you that question. Kant says, tell the truth, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's insane. That's moral cowardice dressed up as principle. That's valuing abstract philosophy over a real human life. But hear him out, because this is where it gets interesting. Kant would say, when you lie to that murderer, you're not actually respecting him as a human being. You're treating him like a tool, like a machine you can manipulate with false information. You're using him. And the moment you use another person, even a murderer, you've violated something sacred. You've treated a rational being as a means to your end, rather than an end in themselves. Plus, and this is the part that really stings, you're not actually responsible for what he does with the truth. You're only responsible for your actions. Your duty is to tell the truth. His crime is his own. If you lie, you've made yourself into a liar. You've corrupted your own moral integrity. And for what? To save one life by destroying the foundation of all moral action? Now, I'll be honest with you. The first time I really sat with this argument, I hated it. It felt cold, inhuman, absurdly rigid. But then I asked myself a harder question. If I'm willing to lie to save my friend, where do I draw the line? When is lying okay, and when isn't it? Who decides? Me? The government? Popular vote? And once I've decided that truth is conditional, that sometimes it's okay to deceive, how do I prevent that exception from becoming the rule? Because here's what history shows us. Every atrocity, every authoritarian nightmare, Every propaganda machine starts with someone saying, "We'll just lie this once, for the greater good." Still, most of us would lie to save our friend. We'd lie, and we'd sleep fine that night, knowing we did the right thing. But let me change the scenario just a little. What if it's not one friend? What if it's 1,000 people? 10,000? What if the person at the door isn't a lone criminal, but represents an enemy nation? What if the weapon isn't a gun, but a biological agent that could kill millions? What if lying isn't a split-second decision to save someone you love, but your actual job? What if you wake up every morning and put on a suit and go to an office where your job description is literally deceive people to protect national security? What if you're a spy? Here's something we don't talk about enough. Every democracy on earth is built on a contradiction. We worship transparency. We demand accountability. We teach our children that honesty is a core value. We celebrate whistleblowers. We impeach politicians for lying. Our entire system is supposedly built on truth. And at the exact same time, every single one of these democracies employs thousands of people whose entire job is to lie, deceive, and manipulate. We call them intelligence officers. We call it national security. We call it keeping us safe. And we really, really don't like thinking about what that means. Let me paint you a picture. This isn't hypothetical. This is the pattern that repeats constantly in intelligence work. You're an intelligence officer. You've spent years building a relationship with someone inside a terrorist organization. This person, your asset, has finally gotten access to the inner circle. And one day, they send you a message. There's an attack coming, 3 days from now. Multiple targets. Thousands of people could die. The information is solid, actionable. You can stop this. But there's a problem. The terrorist organization knows there's a leak. They're hunting for the mole. And if you act on this intelligence directly, they'll figure out who talked. Your asset will be tortured and killed, and every future opportunity to stop attacks will evaporate. So you have a choice. You can plant false intelligence, make it look like the information came from somewhere else, deceive your own oversight committees about the source, lie to Congress, lie to the press if they start asking questions, commit perjury, technically speaking, which is a federal crime. Or you can play it by the book, tell the complete truth to your oversight committees, risk the leak being traced back to your asset, and lose both the source and potentially the ability to stop the attack. You plant the false intelligence. You lie to the people who are supposed to keep you accountable. The attack is stopped. 3,000 people go home that night, never knowing how close they came to death. Your asset stays safe and continues providing life-saving information. And you've just violated every principle of democratic governance that you swore to protect. Kant would say you failed. You traded truth for consequences. You turned morality into a cost-benefit calculation. But consequentialists, people who judge actions by outcomes, would say you're a hero. You saved thousands of lives. You made the hard call. You got your hands dirty so others could stay clean. This is what philosophers call the exception. The moment when the rule breaks. When the textbook answer meets the real world and discovers they're not compatible. But here's what those philosophy textbooks don't tell you. For a spy, the exception isn't exceptional. It's Tuesday. You don't plant one lie and then return to normal life. You lie every single day. Every meeting is strategic deception. Every relationship is evaluated for intelligence value. Every conversation is an operational security risk. Your spouse thinks you work in energy consulting. Your kids don't know what you really do. For their own safety, you tell yourself. Your parents believe the cover story. Your friends are either fellow officers who understand, or they're part of the legend you maintain. Your hobbies exist to support your cover. Even your personality, the version of you that the world sees, is carefully constructed. You're not living a lie. You are the lie. Philosophers have a term for this: dirty hands. It's the moral stain that doesn't wash off. Michael Walzer described it beautifully. Sometimes you do the right thing and you're still contaminated. Maybe especially when you do the right thing. You saved lives. You served your country. And you're morally corrupted anyway. But there's something deeper. Something the intelligence community knows about but doesn't advertise. It's called moral injury. Moral injury isn't guilt. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Guilt has a path to redemption. Apologize, make amends, do better next time. Moral injury says, I am the mistake. It's what happens when you repeatedly violate your own deepest values. Not by accident, not in a moment of weakness, but systematically as a job requirement. Even when you believe the cause is just. Even when you know you're saving lives. Studies show intelligence officers experience moral injury at rates comparable to combat veterans. Depression, divorce, substance abuse, suicide. The statistics are devastating. You did everything right. You followed your training. You saved countless lives. You're a patriot, a hero in a classified file that almost no one will ever read. And you're broken. The mission succeeds. The agency continues. The democracy you protected keeps functioning with its principles of truth and transparency intact. But you, the person who took on the moral cost, you pay the price. Not the institution, not the state, not the citizens sleeping safely because of what you did. Just you, alone, with no one to tell. No one who would understand even if you could tell them. Here's the cruelest part. We need you to break so we don't have to. We outsource our moral contradictions to people who work in shadows. We get to keep our principles clean because they sacrifice theirs. We sleep soundly because they carry the weight of necessary evils we don't want to acknowledge. And we call this national security. So let's go back to that door one more time. But now the stakes have changed. You're not protecting one friend anymore. You're protecting thousands, millions, an entire way of life. And the person at the door isn't a lone criminal. It's a hostile nation, a terrorist network, an authoritarian regime that sees your democracy's commitment to truth as weakness, your transparency as vulnerability, your moral principles as tools to be exploited. Do you tell the truth? Kant's answer never changes. Truth is absolute. The moment you make it conditional, even to save millions, you've destroyed the foundation of morality itself. You've admitted that ethics is just utilitarianism in disguise, that the ends always justify the means, that there's no real difference between you and the murderer, except that you're better at math. But here's the question that keeps me awake. Can a country committed to truth actually survive in a world where its enemies have no such commitment? World War II was won partly because of Operation Fortitude, a massive, systematic campaign of lies that convinced Hitler the invasion would happen at Calais instead of Normandy. That deception saved tens of thousands of lives. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest we've come to nuclear war, was resolved through back-channel communications that required deliberate deception of Congress and the American public. Modern counter-terrorism depends fundamentally on double agents, false information, and protecting sources through strategic lies. Strip away the capacity for intelligence deception, and you potentially make democracies defenseless against adversaries who operate under no such constraints. So which is it? Are we noble for tying one hand behind our back? Or are we suicidal? And here's the question that haunts me even more. What does it mean that we ask individual human beings to bear this cost for us? Think about it. We, the citizens, the democracy, the society, we get to maintain our principles. We teach our children that honesty is sacred. We condemn politicians who lie. We celebrate transparency and accountability. And simultaneously, we employ people whose job is to systematically violate everything we claim to value. We stay morally pure because they get dirty. We keep our hands clean because theirs are stained. We preserve our principles because they sacrifice theirs. The philosopher Tony Cody called this out. The real corruption isn't in the intelligence services, it's in us. In a society that benefits from necessary lies while pretending we're not complicit, we can't celebrate our commitment to truth while depending on people whose job is to violate it. We can't have it both ways. So what's the answer? What do we actually do with this impossible dilemma? Do we abolish intelligence services and accept whatever comes through that door? Do we embrace Kant's absolute truth and watch as terrorists, hostile nations, and genocidal regimes operate freely while we maintain our moral purity? Or do we accept that some people must sacrifice their integrity for the collective good, and then have the courage and decency to acknowledge what we're asking them to do? Maybe that means building real support systems for moral injury, not treating psychological damage as weakness, not telling intelligence officers to just toughen up when their souls are fragmenting from carrying contradictions the rest of us refuse to bear. Maybe it means limiting the exception to genuine existential threats instead of letting it become routine bureaucracy. Creating real oversight that distinguishes between lies told to defend democracy and lies told to defend the intelligence apparatus itself. Maybe it means being honest, brutally honest, about the fact that our comfortable lives are built on moral compromises we've outsourced to people in the shadows. Kant believed morality was like mathematics, absolute, universal, provable. 2 + 2 = 4. And lying is always wrong, no exceptions, no circumstances, no debate. But I think morality might be more like engineering. When you build a bridge, you can't eliminate the opposing forces. Gravity pulls down. Structure pushes up. Compression fights tension. The bridge doesn't stand because it eliminates these forces. It stands because it holds them in balance. The tension is the point. Remove it, and the whole thing collapses. Maybe the moral life is the same. Maybe this tension between absolute rules and necessary exceptions isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to manage. Maybe the goal isn't to eliminate the contradiction, but to hold it honestly, acknowledge the cost, and refuse the comfort of easy answers. The exception remains unresolved. It has to. Because the moment we resolve it, the moment we decide that truth is always absolute or consequences always win, we've lost something essential. Right now, somewhere in the world, an intelligence officer is making a decision that will save lives and damage their soul. They're doing it because someone has to. They know the cost, they'll pay it anyway, and we'll go about our day. Protected by lies we'll never know were told, defended by people whose names we'll never learn, benefiting from moral compromises we've decided not to think about. The moral exception isn't a failure of ethics. It's not a loophole or a weakness or an admission of defeat. It's the place where ethics becomes real, where philosophy meets the actual world, where we discover whether our principles are genuine commitments or just comfortable thoughts we have when nothing's at stake. The door is still there. The question remains unanswered. And maybe it should be. What will you do? This video is part of my series, Philosophy from Around the World. Today, we travel to Mongolia to uncover a philosophy that's as dark as it is profound. A lone horseman rides through an ocean of white. The steppe stretches endlessly in every direction. No trees, no hills, no shelter. Just wind, snow, and silence so deep, it feels like the earth itself has stopped breathing. The temperature drops to 40 below. The sky merges with the ground in a wall of fog. Out here, you could ride for days and see nothing but emptiness. And in that emptiness, the Mongols discovered something the rest of the world spends its life running from. This is Mongolia, a land so vast it makes you feel like a ghost. A place where winter can kill you in hours, where survival depends not on what you own, but on what you're willing to let go. For centuries, the people here have lived under the cruelest teacher on earth, the steppe itself, and it taught them a philosophy the modern world has forgotten. Everything you cling to is temporary. Everything you build will fall. And in that terrifying truth lies the only real freedom. The Mongols conquered half the world, yet they left no palaces, no monuments, no cities of stone. They built an empire on horseback and let the wind erase it, because they understood something we've lost. Power fades, wealth crumbles, and the only thing that remains is the emptiness you were always trying to fill. This is the dark philosophy of Mongolia, the wisdom of emptiness. And once you see it, you can never look at life the same way again. The Mongolian steppe is not beautiful in the way we usually think of beauty. It doesn't inspire, it humbles. It doesn't comfort, it challenges. Stand in the center of it, and you'll feel something primal stir inside you. The realization that you are utterly insignificant. There are no borders here, no roads, no landmarks to orient yourself. Just grass, wind, and sky stretching beyond comprehension. In summer, it's an endless sea of green that ripples like water. In winter, it becomes a white void where the horizon vanishes and you can lose yourself in minutes. The temperature swings from scorching heat to bone-splitting cold. Storms appear out of nowhere. Wolves hunt in packs. Resources are scarce. This is where the Mongols learned their first lesson. Nature does not care about you. You cannot conquer the steppe. You cannot control it. You can only flow with it, adapt to it, or die. And so the Mongols became nomads, people who owned nothing they couldn't carry, who followed the seasons, who understood that survival meant letting go. They didn't build permanent homes, because permanence is an illusion. They didn't accumulate wealth because wealth becomes a burden when you have to move every few months. They learned to live lightly, to take what they needed and leave no trace. This way of life carved a philosophy into their bones. Attachment is suffering. When you live on the steppe, you see impermanence everywhere. Grass grows, then dies. Rivers flood, then dry up. Animals are born, they live, they become food. Even the land itself shifts. Dunes move, valleys fill with snow, lakes appear and disappear. Nothing stays, nothing holds. And if you try to hold on, the land will teach you the cost. The Mongols watched empires rise and fall. They saw the ruins of cities swallowed by sand. They heard stories of kings who built fortresses that crumbled in a generation. And they learned the deepest truth of all. The only constant is change. But here's where it gets dark. The step doesn't just teach you impermanence. It teaches you that you are impermanent too. Your body, your thoughts, your identity, all of it is as fleeting as a cloud. The Mongols didn't fear this. They embraced it. Because once you accept that you are temporary, you stop wasting your life clinging to illusions. You stop trying to build monuments to yourself. You stop pretending you're in control. And in that surrender, something shifts. When you stop fighting the emptiness, you start to see it clearly. The step isn't just empty space. It's alive with possibility. It's a mirror that reflects your own mind back at you. The silence isn't absence, it's presence. The vastness isn't terrifying, it's liberating. Because when there's nothing to cling to, there's nothing to lose. This is the foundation of Mongolian philosophy. Life is not about accumulation. It's about flow. It's about riding the wind, not building walls against it. It's about understanding that the emptiness you fear is actually the source of all freedom. The steppe taught them this, and they never forgot. But the philosophy goes deeper, because the Mongols didn't just learn from the land, they learned from the spirits that lived in it, and those spirits had lessons of their own. Before Buddhism arrived, before empires, before history itself, the Mongols lived in a world that was alive. Not metaphorically alive, literally alive. Every rock, every river, every gust of wind had a spirit. The steppe wasn't just land, it was a living, breathing entity. And the shamans were the ones who could speak to it. Mongolian shamanism is older than language. It comes from a time when humans understood themselves as part of nature, not separate from it. The shamans, called Burgud or Zarin, were intermediaries between the visible and invisible worlds. They could enter trances, travel to the spirit realm, communicate with ancestors, and channel the voices of animals, mountains, and storms. And what did the spirits teach? The same lesson the steppe taught. You are not the center. You are one thread in a web so vast you cannot see the edges. The Mongols believed that everything in nature had consciousness. The wolf wasn't just an animal, it was a teacher of cunning and survival. The eagle wasn't just a bird, it was a symbol of vision and freedom. The horse wasn't just transportation, it was a sacred companion, a bridge between earth and sky. Every encounter with an animal was a message from the universe. If a wolf crossed your path, it meant you needed to sharpen your instincts. If an eagle circled above, it meant you needed to rise above your problems and see the bigger picture. If your horse refused to move, it meant danger was near. Listen, don't force. This wasn't superstition. It was a way of reading the world. The Mongols understood that nature speaks in symbols, and if you learn the language, it will guide you. But here's where shamanism becomes dark. The spirits didn't just teach lessons, they demanded respect. If you disrespected the land, the spirits would punish you. Storms would come, animals would flee, sickness would spread. The shamans would perform rituals to appease the spirits. But sometimes the answer was simple. You have to let go. Let go of your arrogance. Let go of your greed. Let go of the idea that you control anything. There's a story the Mongols tell about a hunter who killed too many wolves. He became rich from their pelts, but his mind grew restless. He couldn't sleep. He heard howling in the wind. One night, a shaman visited him and said, "The wolf spirits are angry. You took more than you needed. Now they will take from you." The hunter laughed. "I fear no spirits." That night, he rode out into the steppe. His horse panicked and threw him. He broke his leg. Wolves found him before dawn. They didn't kill him, They circled him, watching as he froze to death in the snow. The message was clear. The step gives and the step takes. You are not in charge. This is the shamanic worldview. Impermanence enforced by invisible forces. You don't own the land. You don't own the animals. You don't even own your life. You are borrowing it. And when the spirits decide your time is up, no amount of wealth or power will save you. But shamanism also taught something beautiful. If you live in harmony with the spirits, if you take only what you need, if you respect the cycles of life and death, if you accept your place in the web, then the spirits become allies. They guide you, they protect you. They show you truths you could never see on your own. The Mongols learned to listen, to the wind, to the animals, to the silence between thoughts. And in that listening, they found a kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books or teachers. It comes from the earth itself. This is why Mongolian shamanism is inseparable from their philosophy of emptiness. The spirits taught them that the self is an illusion. You are not separate from the wolf, the eagle, the mountain. You are part of the same flow. And when you die, you return to that flow. You become the wind, the grass, the next life in the cycle. Death isn't an ending, it's a transformation. And once you understand that, fear loses its grip. Then Buddhism arrived. And it took this primal wisdom and refined it into something even sharper. When Tibetan Buddhism reached Mongolia in the 16th century, it didn't replace shamanism, it merged with it. The Mongols saw in Buddhism the same truths the steppe had already taught them: impermanence, non-attachment, the illusion of the self. But Buddhism gave them a framework, a map of the mind that went even deeper. At the heart of Buddhist philosophy is the concept of shunyata, emptiness. Not emptiness as nothingness, but emptiness as the fundamental nature of reality. Everything you see, everything you experience, everything you think you are, it's all empty of inherent existence. It only exists in relation to other things. There is no solid, permanent you, no fixed identity, no eternal soul. You are a process, not a thing. A river, not a rock. For the Mongols, this wasn't abstract philosophy. It was lived experience. They had already seen it on the steppe. The self is like a tent in the wind. It seems solid, but it's held together by threads that can be pulled apart at any moment. Your thoughts, your emotions, your memories, they arise, they pass, they dissolve. Nothing stays. Buddhism taught them to stop clinging to the illusion, to stop building a fortress around a self that doesn't exist. Because the more you cling, the more you suffer. This is the second noble truth. Suffering comes from attachment. You suffer because you want things to stay. You want your body to stay young, your loved ones to stay alive, your happiness to stay constant, but nothing stays. And so you suffer. The solution? Let go. Not in a passive, defeated way, but in a clear, awake way. See things as they are, impermanent, empty, flowing, and stop trying to hold water in your hands. The Mongols took this teaching and lived it. They didn't accumulate. They didn't cling. They rode across empires and left no monuments because monuments are just another form of clinging, an attempt to cheat impermanence. Even Genghis Khan, the greatest conqueror in history, understood this. Oral traditions say he once told his generals, "We ride the wind. We leave no trace. When we are gone, only stories will remain, and stories too will fade." He built an empire that stretched from Korea to Hungary, yet he left no palaces, no statues, no inscriptions. He was buried in an unmarked grave that has never been found. Because he understood power is temporary, fame is temporary, even memory is temporary. All that remains is the emptiness. But here's the twist, and this is where Mongolian philosophy becomes truly profound. Emptiness is not nihilism. It's not despair. It's not nothing matters. It's the opposite. When you realize everything is empty, you stop wasting your life on illusions. You stop chasing things that can never satisfy you. And in that clarity, you become free. Free to live fully without fear. Free to love without clinging. Free to create without needing it to last forever. This is the secret the Mongols discovered. Emptiness is not the end of meaning. It's the beginning. Because when you're not attached to outcomes, you can engage with life completely. You can ride into battle knowing you might die. You can love someone knowing they will leave. You can build something knowing it will crumble. And none of that diminishes the act. It makes it more real. Buddhism calls this upaya, skillful action without attachment. The Mongols called it riding the wind. And it's the darkest, most beautiful truth you'll ever encounter. Life is fleeting, meaningless, and empty. And because of that, it's infinite. We live in a world that tells us the opposite of everything Mongolia teaches. Accumulate, build, hold on, make your mark, be remembered, fear death, fear failure, fear irrelevance. We're taught that happiness comes from having more money, more status, more security, more control. We're told to build walls around ourselves, to protect what's ours, to make ourselves solid and permanent in a world that's constantly shifting. And we suffer for it. Because the more we cling, the more we fear losing. The more we own, the more we have to protect. The more we try to control, the more anxious we become when things slip through our fingers. We spend our lives building fortresses against impermanence, and impermanence always wins. Mongolia offers a different path. What if you stopped clinging? What if you accepted that everything you have will eventually be taken away? Your youth, your health, your loved ones, your life. And instead of running from that truth, you embraced it. Not in a morbid, depressing way, but in a clear, awake way. When you accept impermanence, you stop wasting energy on illusions. You stop chasing things that can never satisfy you. You stop building an identity around things that will crumble. And in that space, something opens up. Freedom. Real freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be present, to engage fully with life, knowing it won't last. The freedom to love without fear, create without attachment, exist without needing to prove anything. This is what the steppe teaches. This is what the shamans taught. This is what Buddhism refined into a philosophy. And it's what we've forgotten. We live in a culture of distraction, accumulation, and fear. We're terrified of emptiness, so we fill every moment with noise, every space with stuff, every silence with screens. We're addicted to the illusion of permanence, and it's killing us. But Mongolia whispers a different truth. Emptiness is not something to fear. It's something to embrace. Because in the emptiness, there's clarity. In the impermanence, there's freedom. In the letting go, there's peace. The Mongols understood this because they had no choice. The steppe forced them to confront the truth every single day. You are small, life is short, and nothing lasts. And instead of collapsing under that weight, they became some of the most resilient, adaptable, and spiritually profound people in history. They conquered empires and let them go. They loved fiercely and released gently. They lived fully, knowing they would die. And they were free. So here's the final reflection. What are you clinging to? What are you afraid to lose? What illusion are you building your life around? And what would happen if you let it go? Not because you don't care, but because you see clearly. Because you understand that everything is temporary, including you. And in that understanding, you stop wasting your life on fear and start living with the kind of presence and clarity that only comes when you've made peace with the emptiness. Mongolia teaches the cruelest, purest truth. Everything dies, everything fades. And yet in that emptiness, there is a power, a clarity, and a freedom the world will never sell you. The steppe is still there, the wind is still blowing, and the lesson is still waiting for anyone brave enough to listen. Will you? The alkali raft experiment was a grand but deeply misguided venture, dreamt up by a wildly incompetent scientist. Yet, oddly enough, it's also a strangely charming story. Santiago Terrazaga was an anthropologist obsessed with understanding human violence. In the 1970s, inspired by a study on monkeys, he became convinced that most aggression in that species came from competition for sex. Santiago wanted to see if this applied to humans too. He believed that if he could uncover the roots of human violence, he might also discover the secret to world peace. That was his vision. But let me pause here to tell you something about Santiago. Throughout this story, almost every decision he makes will leave you thinking, wow, what a bizarre and foolish man. And you'd be absolutely right. Santiago was a terrible scientist, and his experiment makes that painfully clear. In the 1970s, he devised the alkali raft expedition. His plan: put 10 people on a raft and let them drift across the Atlantic Ocean from Spain to Mexico for 101 days. The raft itself was nearly 40 feet long, big enough that space wouldn't be a serious problem. Food was pre-packaged and rationed for the whole journey. Still, the trip was dangerous, and that, for Santiago, was part of the point. He believed danger would strip people down to their primal selves. He selected 6 women and 4 men from different countries and cultures. He wanted a diverse group to A. Spark tension, and B. Create a miniature version of the world on his raft. But his selection wasn't random. Santiago wanted sexual tension, so everyone was young, mostly in their 20s and early 30s, and all of them were attractive. He even added a strikingly handsome priest to see what might happen. Reflecting the era, Santiago assigned women to the most powerful roles on board. The captain, the diver for maintenance, and the radio operator were all women. This was one of the experiment's few admirable aspects, though, as you'll see later, his commitment to that idea was shaky at best. By May 12, 1973, Santiago had his plan, his raft, and his volunteers. The expedition set off. Santiago's method was essentially to sit back, observe, and jot notes in his journal, while the people on board supposedly descended into chaos and violence. To me, that feels less like science, and more like a voyeuristic fantasy. But that was his vision. And to show you just how strange this experiment was, every participant had to sign a contract stating they would give their souls, bodies, and minds to Santiago. Each week, he handed out private questionnaires, asking things like, how do you feel about the others? Who would you remove from the raft? Who do you like most? Who would you most want to sleep with? What would drive you to violence? What might drive the others? weird and invasive, but all supposedly for science. From the start, it was clear what Santiago wanted. He expected fights. He wanted breakdowns, aggression, and blood. But weeks passed, and nothing of the sort happened. In fact, everyone on the raft started getting along. They were laughing, smiling, and playing games together. The footage from the voyage looks like a vacation, not a nightmare. Santiago also hoped sexual encounters would create jealousy and conflict. Eventually, yes, some of the participants did hook up. A few men and women slept together, but it was mostly out of boredom. There was no emotional weight to it, and thus no drama. The experiment was drifting in the exact opposite direction Santiago had hoped. As the group grew friendlier, Santiago's questionnaires grew more extreme. How many times have you masturbated? Who have you slept with? Who do you want to sleep with? Who do you want to kill? Not surprisingly, the more intrusive his questions became, the more the group began to dislike him. In fact, when asked, "Who do you dislike the most?" the most common answer on the raft became Santiago himself. One morning, a few of the passengers were fishing when someone pulled a small shark out of the water. They hauled it onto the deck, and the group buzzed with excitement. Reading Santiago's journal from that moment, you can see he believed this would finally spark the violence he'd been waiting for. He wrote that the group had bashed the shark's head with an axe and torn its flesh apart. But the video footage tells a much calmer story. They simply cut up the shark and prepared dinner. There was nothing savage about it. Much to Santiago's dismay, the good vibes continued. Life on the raft became a strange mix of sunbathing, casual hookups, and growing resentment towards Santiago himself. The participants were actually bonding. Day by day, they shared more of their private lives. It became something surprisingly tender, a little floating community. One woman revealed the raft was her escape from an abusive relationship, and the others helped her heal. Another, the only African-American woman on board, had a profound moment of recognition. She realized her ancestors had likely crossed the Atlantic as enslaved people. That thought, she later said, made her more grateful for the opportunities she now had. And through all this, Santiago sat in his corner, still hoping the group would turn on one another. Then, one day, the rudder broke. You'll remember Santiago had hired women for the key jobs on board. One of them, Savani Zanatti, was the designated diver, trained, capable, and ready to fix the rudder. But Santiago refused to let her go overboard, saying she couldn't dive because she was a woman. A bizarre move, considering he'd chosen her as diver because she was a woman. Savan was angry, but stepped back. Santiago then took her gear, which didn't fit him, and tried to do the repair himself. He didn't know how to work her equipment, his mask didn't seal properly, and he didn't know how to dive. He nearly drowned and surfaced with the rudder still broken. That night, after Santiago went to bed, Savain slipped into the water and fixed the rudder herself. When Santiago found out the next morning, he was furious. This moment was the turning point. From then on, he began openly manipulating his experiment. He called a meeting and scolded the group for being too friendly, accusing them of not taking the study seriously. Then he started reading aloud from their private questionnaires, revealing who had written they wanted to kill whom or who wanted to sleep with whom. It was a gross and clumsy attempt to sow chaos. At one point, he even called the sole black woman aboard a primitive, suggesting she should sleep with the black man on the raft because it was natural. Of course, all of this only made the group despise him more. They had already formed close friendships. His provocations barely moved the needle. By now, newspapers had caught wind of the whole thing. Reporters dubbed it the sex raft and focused almost entirely on the sexual activity on board. The university backing Santiago saw the headlines as disastrous publicity and quickly cut ties with him and his project. Now unemployed and humiliated, Santiago was more bitter than ever. Then a tropical storm loomed as the raft drifted into the Caribbean. The raft's captain, a Swedish woman named Maria, was in charge of steering them through danger and keeping them on course. She decided they should head for a nearby island to shelter. Santiago objected, saying contact with civilization would ruin his study. But Maria refused to gamble lives for what was clearly a failing experiment. So Santiago simply stripped her of her captaincy and named himself captain. He ordered everyone into the cabin, locked the doors, and told them to ride out the storm. Luckily, the storm veered off, leaving only wind and rain. But from that point forward, Santiago was captain. By then, everyone on board hated him. They even briefly fantasized about killing him, planning how they might make it look like an accident. In the end, they decided against it. But the thought was there. Then one morning, a massive freighter appeared on the horizon, heading straight for the raft. It wasn't drifting past, it was on a direct collision course. If it didn't turn, the little raft would be crushed and everyone aboard would die. Santiago, now the self-appointed captain, panicked. He ran around shouting without a clue what to do. Maria, the former captain, stayed calm. She quickly took charge, giving clear instructions. Under her direction, they fired flares, waved signal flags, and blasted the horn. At the last possible moment, the freighter veered off, narrowly missing the raft. From then on, Maria was captain again, and rightfully so. After that scare, Santiago withdrew almost completely. He stopped handing out questionnaires, stopped taking notes, and stopped holding meetings. Instead, he sulked in the cabin, barely emerging. He soon claimed to be sick and lay in bed being tended to. The onboard medic later said they suspected he was faking illness for attention. With Santiago essentially gone, life on the raft blossomed. Without his constant probing and manipulation, the group relaxed and began to genuinely enjoy themselves. What had been casual friendships deepened into real bonds. By the time they finally reached their destination, the passengers were no longer just strangers thrown together for an experiment. They were close friends. Despite Santiago's obsessive craving for violence, it never came. The group had grown into a floating support system instead. That's why I love this story. It's a simple, almost accidental parable of goodness outlasting cruelty. To me, Santiago was never really doing science. He seemed more like a voyeur hoping to stage some dark, Lord of the Flies spectacle. His experiment was unscientific from the start, and despite all his meddling, he never got the eruption of violence he so desperately wanted. Instead, he accidentally created a small community and a set of lifelong friendships